The Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College has presented free talks for the public by best-selling authors and great thinkers on the college's Upper East Side campus.
Hi, did you enjoy it?
Those of you who are writers know what I'm talking about. You have a little voice in your head, drives you crazy.
We're dancing with words, prancing with words.
As a result of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic and required social distancing, public gatherings such as our remaining 2 talks for the spring semester have unfortunately been canceled.
Thank goodness we've recorded it.
Center Director Louis Frumkes has had each of the talks recorded for archives and to provide a copy of the talk to the speaker on DVD.
We have some incredible scientists coming.
That the universe just began.
Given the need for intellectual stimulation during this troubling time, the Frumkes Center is making many of our past talks available to view for a limited time each week. Stay tuned to our website for more information about the videos available each week.
My name is Louis Frumkes, and I'm the director of the Writing Center here at Hunter. And before we do the formal part of this evening and presentation, I want to tell you about some of the events coming up in the spring. As I'd hoped to have brochures here for you now. They're at the printer, but you'll be receiving them in the mail, and probably. And one never knows these days. But to start with the best-selling author series, in January we're having Stacy Schiff here. She won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, as you know. You probably all read Cleopatra and something else. And then in February we're having Alice McDermott, and in March it's Susan Isaacs, and then Alan First, and then Stuart Woods. And for the best, the Great Thinkers series, we're having Steven Pinker and his wife Rebecca Goldstein, equally brilliant in her own right. And then we will have Seth Lloyd, whom you might not know, but he's a he's a quantum engineer at MIT. That means he builds computers at the quantum level, meaning the almost subatomic level, smaller than atoms. And it has tremendous future in nanotechnology and a lot of other areas. He's very, very smart. And then we have John Donahue coming, who's the head of brain science at Brown, and he's working on the cutting edge of kinetic activity with the brain and computers. So he is experimenting and has had some success with paraplegics with whom he has hooked up these electrodes, and they are able to move things with thought, which is rather extraordinary and part of the new world that we're living in. So that's coming. And then we have a rocket science type person, a rock star. Her name is Lisa Randall. She's probably the most important female particle physicist in the world. She teaches at Harvard and has taught at MIT and Princeton. She does work. She's an expert on the Great Hadron Collider, and she does. She's the one who has been working on the. You've all heard of the 11 dimensions of string theory and so forth, and she's the one who's doing all the work in dimensions, and very exciting. Anyway, there are 2 other speakers that I want to mention. One is someone some of you may have heard of. What? Not loud? Not loud enough? We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. We're having David Patrick Columbia, some of you may know, the editor of Quest magazine and the New York Social Diary. And then we're having the Clyers, mother and 2 daughters, who have written a best-selling book and have a hot show on television called Selling New York, and own Gumley Haft Clyer. And they're going to talk about real estate and all of that. Very, very interesting, actually. And a few other surprises. But tonight we're here for a very special evening. It's, I'll say it formally. Well, we're going to get to that, Tina. Tina's an eager soul. Tonight represents the final event in the Glorious Irish Voices series that the Writing Center began 5 years ago. During that time, we have presented the likes of the McCourt brothers, Alice McDermott, Mary Higgins Clark, Edna O'Brien, Nuala Phelan, Colin McCann, and a dozen other outstanding Irish and Irish-American writers. a series perhaps unique even in this great literary town. My friend Tina Flaherty, a self-described alpha female who has underwritten the Irish Voices series for the last 5 years, and who has been described by Business Week as one of America's top corporate women, not to mention a top philanthropist, will host the event tonight. And we can announce that beginning this summer, Tina will be underwriting a new Winston Churchill series that will be held at Hunter's very prestigious Roosevelt House, the original house of Eleanor and Franklin, and which should prove very exciting. So it is only fitting that Tina introduce Liz Smith to you this evening, who in turn will introduce her dear friend Iris Love, and then ask her questions. If you have your own questions for Iris or Liz after the presentation, just raise your hands and Tina will call on you. And remember, there are our usual complimentary refreshments in the rear of the room. Please enjoy the evening. Tina.
Thank you, Louis. One of the best things about the Irish Voice literary series is the way Louis introduces me. He makes me sound better than I sound to myself, so I'll certainly miss that, Louis. And this series came it happened because of an accident. I took Louis down to the Irish Repertory Theater one night when his wife was out of town, so we took him down there, and they were at. And so he knew they were asking me for a grant, and he called me the next day. He said, "You like Irish? You like Irish?" I said, "Yeah, I like Irish." He said, "I can do Irish too." I said, "You can do Irish too?" He said, "Yeah, you don't have to go to the Irish Repertory Theater." He said, "We can do Irish right here." And so I said, "Well, okay." So then that's how the Irish Voice literary series began, because Louis was creative. So as he just told you, this is our 5th and our final year, and I'm kind of sad about it, and I know Louis has, because we've had quite a following. We started at Marymount, and then we transferred to Hunter last year, but we have had all the greats. We had Frank McCourt, who won the Pulitzer Prize. We had Alice McDermott, who won the National Book Award for Charming Billy, and we also had, last year, we had Liz's friend. Now I know that. But we also had Liz's friend, Edna O'Brien. We had Nuala O'Phelan, among others. And then last year, of course, in December, we had another National Book Award winner. We had Colum McCann. So we've had really a great run. But tonight, we've got something different going on. Now, normally I would introduce the speaker, who I know very well, Iris Love, for a lot of different ways, but mainly we're on the board of the Animal Medical Center. But I've been friends with Iris for a long time, as I have with Liz. So we're going to have a departure tonight. The legendary Liz is going to introduce you. And it's very appropriate, because Liz is the diva of dish. She's been described that way. She's the queen of scoop. Lots of things have been said about her, but all of us know that she is legendary, and she's one of the most celebrated entertainment journalists in the world. She's worked for more than 30 years in the business. She was the New York Post, the Daily News, and Newsday. Plus, she had a TV show that you won an Emmy for. So she's got all the honors, and I can tell you she's hobnobbed, she's air-kissed, she's and she shook their hand, and then she races home to write all about it. So that's what Liz does. But tonight she's going to be asking some very interesting questions, and it's more than appropriate that Liz is introducing Irish, because Liz Smith is probably Irish and doesn't know it, because Smith is the 5th most common surname in Ireland. So don't expect her to speak in a brogue or anything. But she's a Southern gal like me. She's got a drawl and a twang, because she's from Fort Worth, Texas. So the one and only Liz.
Well, it's a good thing this is the Irish series, and that both Iris Love and I just happen to be Irish. Back in 1977, before most of you lovely people were even born, you'd certainly never heard of the Kardashians. Well, I became friends with a person I had long admired from afar because I'm just a fan like everybody else. And she had already been twice on the front page of the New York Times. She had been in the New York Times Magazine. She had had a CBS documentary done about her, and she was about to be profiled by the New Yorker. She was the archaeologist who had, on the very first day that man walked on the moon, discovered the long-lost temple of Aphrodite. That was on the coast of Turkey, which had once been a part of the Golden Greek world. So last year, as I recall, thanks to Tina Flaherty and Louis Frumkes, Iris Love told you all about that, what it was like to discover where the goddess of love had been. And later, after I had known Iris for a little while, I realized she was even more distinguished. In her junior year abroad, she had found a section of the lost ancient Via Cassia between Orvieto and Florence in Italy. Well, that was pretty high cotton for a young student. And even as a young student, she had pointed out to the Metropolitan Museum that their popular Etruscan warriors were fake. This didn't make her too popular, and she wasn't even 21 yet, I don't think. And Iris did over for the Chinese not too long ago in Xi'an the English captions on their new Xi'an Shangxi Museum, the one that has the famous terracotta warriors and all of their entire history. And Iris phoned me and said, the Chinese want me to stay here and help them excavate that. And there's so much to find. And I said, but Iris, nobody in the rest of the world will ever hear from you again. You'll just disappear. She said, maybe you're right. Anyway, we have all benefited from Iris's work in China because I doubt that many of you, certainly not me, read Chinese. I met Iris by accident at a dinner party. I was immediately taken by her. She was standing at the top of a stair, and she was slim and athletic looking. She had on a beautiful Givenchy dress, and she was having an argument with the hostess before she ever sat down to dinner or even got in the room. And they were arguing about whether archaeology, the study of man's creations, or anthropology, the study of man, was more important. And of course, Iris won the argument. And what I discovered through the years was that Iris does not particularly want to be brought into the 21st century. I realized this reading a letter that was typed over her desk to the IRS, quote, once again, circumstances beyond my control have prevented my being able to file my taxes. That's Iris. Tonight, Iris is going to let me question her for your delectation, I hope, on her adventures as a student at Smith College when she went every summer with her professors, Phyllis and Carl Lehmann, to work on the island of Samothrace in Greece. If you have probably all traveled in the Cycladic Islands, but I don't know too many people that have gone to Samothrace, which is to the north in the Aegean Sea. But I know that you are familiar with the greatest Greek statue in the world, a gem of the Louvre, the Nike, not the athletic shoe, but the Victory of Samothrace with her spread wings standing at the top of the stairs in Paris. The winged Victory had been discovered long before young Iris Love began to work on Samothrace every summer. But if it hadn't been discovered, I'm sure Iris would have found her. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to introduce my longtime pal and friend and someone I admire so much, Miss Iris Cornelia Love.
Well, it's virtually impossible to follow Liz. So I don't quite know what to say, but one of the reasons Liz decided that she would ask me questions was she was afraid that I would be talking to you about Samothrace until way past midnight. She felt somehow she could make me, at least try to make me more succinct and brief and perhaps more logical. But no archaeologist is logical. We are just full of imagination. Anyway, Liz, thank you for a fabulous introduction.
Are you ready?
I'm going to have it put in bronze.
Are you ready for my question?
I'll try to be ready.
Why, Iris, were your professors, the Lehmans at Smith College, excavating on Samothrace? Because what made it important in the first place?
They went to Samothrace because Samothrace was the site, the famous site of the great gods, the sanctuary of the great gods, where the important mystery rites were celebrated. Here was situated Nike, the goddess of victory, a larger-than-life statue with spread wings. She was white, made of Parian marble, and she was folding her wings as she descended from the sky, alighting on the prow of a ship which was made of gray Rhodian marble. The wind and the spray from the sea caused the Nike's drapery to look as if it were more revealing than it concealed. In other words, she was more nude than being nude. The statue itself stood in a landscaped rocky pool about 200 feet above the sanctuary itself. In an earthquake, the statue had fallen and was broken in pieces, lying buried in the theater below. For a while, it was speculated that her arms and hands might have held something. But when the right hand was found by the laymen, it was obviously the right hand held nothing, so the arms were simply outstretched. Not, as I repeat, holding anything. This is very important because most Nikes carry necklaces or garlands of victory or palms. She held nothing because she had descended from the sky. The statue, as I said, had fallen from this landscaped sanctuary over 200 feet high above the sanctuary of the great gods in an earthquake, and had fallen and broken into pieces, lying buried in the theater below.
But Iris, don't they show the hand in the Louvre?
Yes, they do. In a plastic box as you look at the Nike to the right, and there's also a finger, the hand and one finger. But very important because, again, it proved she held nothing.
But didn't you find something?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
Well, I wanted you to get on with it.
I had the good luck to find one of the feathers from one of her wings. Now, you know how huge the Nike is, so just imagine the feather that I found was about this large. So I felt that I had found a major object. The Louvre did not replace the feather, or has not to the moment. And there is another dimension about the Louvre's benign neglect, which I will tell you about in a moment. About 800 BC, Greek people came to Samothrace to be initiated into the mystery religion. Unlike the mystery rites celebrated at Eleusis, since 1600 BC, so that's 2,700 years ago, these rites were celebrated in honor of the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. In these mystery rites, the only people who could be initiated were the citizens of Athens. Samothrace, on the other hand, was revolutionary in that this religion accepted slaves and freemen from every country in the then known world, and one could be initiated in one day. There were two levels of initiation, as in baptism and confirmation. One could receive both on the same day. There was a story that the great Spartan king Lysander came to be initiated. Asked by the priests, for there had to be a public confession, King Lysander said, "Who wants to know? You or the gods?" The priest said, "My king, by the gods, of course." Lysander said, "Then step down, and I will make my confession to the gods myself." In 1863, a French consul named Champollion heard there were ancient ruins on Samothrace. And in those days, archaeology was still young as a science, and anybody could collect. There was no UNESCO treaty. That did not happen until November of 1970. Many objects are found on sites when workmen are excavating, and archaeologists or amateurs like Champollion are often not present for the excavation. Champollion was awakened from a nap by workmen screaming, "Evrikome mia yeneka." Translated, "We have found a woman." The spectacular discovery of the Winged Victory placed Samothrace in the forefront of discovery and put the Nike in the Louvre, to France's greater glory. Oh how recent events with great museums have changed and are forced to return their finds to Greece and Italy, only too well known from recent years. But the Greeks, with all their troubles, which we keep reading about, have not had the nerve to ask for the winged victory back. Yet. My professors, the Lamons, had been working on Samothrace summers since 1938. World War II intervened, and they resumed about 1946, taking slaves like me to be their site supervisors. Mrs. Lehmann's advice to me, her very first words when I arrived on Samothrace were, "Iris, don't bleed on the marble." She was a hard taskmaster, but a brilliant teacher. We would gather every night for ouzo and special canned liver pate, which was a treat for us. And Mrs. Lehmann would introduce a subject, still teaching after the day's work. I quickly learned the rudiments of the Samothracian language, Samothracian Greek, and it wasn't until years later, when I was constantly ridiculed by my Athenian Greek friends, that I learned both to speak correctly without the Samothracian accent, which had, a definite Turkish twang to it. I am pleased to say that today I speak and read both ancient Greek with the help of a lexicon and modern Greek. The funny part of this story is that when I returned to Samothrace, the Samothracians were horrified. The people said, "Ah, yeah," which is, "Oh my God, what has happened to you? You used to speak such beautiful Greek, and your accent is now terrible." I should add that Samothrace was dominated by Turkey until 1912. And I subsequently learned to speak Turkish as well.
So, but Iris, I want you to go back to the story you were telling about the Louvre and finding the feather. That seemed incredible to me. Was there something else that happened?
Well, there were a few things, but I won't be able to. I know you're timing me. I was
You're doing
always
fine.
I was always looking around the Samothracian sanctuary, and one day, I have to say, when I'm in Europe or China or anywhere, my eyes are always on the ground because one never knows what one might find. But I was always looking around the Samothracian sanctuary, and one day I noticed a large fragment of gray Rhodian marble in the nearby dried-up riverbed. I went to Dr. Lehmann and pointed out the fragment to him, saying, "Dr. Lehmann, could that be Rhodian marble?" He said, "Yeah, what else do you think it is?" said, Rhodian marble, good. Then I said, if it is Rhodian marble, could it be part of the Nike's ship? And Dr. Lehman said, if you think so, you may excavate it on your own time, which meant the hottest time of the summer day from 12 to 3, but I did. Now this fragment, like the tip of an iceberg, just kept getting bigger, becoming bigger and bigger. And then I finally had to spend not only noon times, but evenings excavating it. Well, it turned out to be the very base of the Winged Victory, and it was huge. If you've ever stood near the Nike, you know how large she is. The Lehmans, of course, claimed the base as their important discovery. Well, we sweated bullets dragging it from the riverbed and down to the seashore where it was to be loaded on a boat. The Lehmans had received permission from the Greek government to graciously send the base to France. So I guess you think I'm going to tell you that when you go to the Louvre, to be sure to see my discovered base of one of the most famous statues in the entire world. But no, the Winged Victory does not stand on my base. That is still in Samothrace in the museum there. The reason? The then Minister of Culture in France, one André Malraux, beloved of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, sent word that we had to pay for the shipment ourselves. I have never seen Dr. Lehman so angry. So France has been too cheap to transport the base. It does weigh a ton, but never mind. I guess the base of the statue is awaiting the return to Greece of the Winged Victory. That'll be the day.
Iris, did the Lehmans ever graciously acknowledge that you, their most ambitious, successful, and famous student, had achieved anything? I mean, after you left Samothrace to work on the Turkish coast and find the Temple of Aphrodite, the love goddess as she was seen by Praxiteles, did they ever say congratulations?
Well, Dr. Lehman had passed away before.
Do you mean he had died?
Yes, he'd fallen off the leaf. Before July 20th, I would like you to remember that date, 1969, when I made my greatest discovery. And Mrs. Lehman was never generous with her praise. No, I'd say no. She was upset with me that I left Samothrace and mounted my own excavation at Knidos on the Turkish coast. But incidentally, let me tell you one more story about Mrs. Lehman. While having ouzo one evening, Mrs. Lehman introduced another one of her interesting topics. She asked if we knew about the blind who had been doing a lot of photography. I said, no. But how could the blind focus on an object? But I didn't say anything. Mrs. Lehmann continued. She said, you know the reason that the blind are photographing? And I said, no. Well, since they are blind, they do not need a dark room. When I pointed out that it wasn't the blind who needed the dark room, but the film, Mrs. Lehmann blithely continued, saying, do you know how I know these interesting facts? And I said, no. She said, my hairdresser told me this, and he is blind too. Well, all I could say, finally, I understood why Mrs. Lehmann's hair was, shall I say, sometimes askew.
Iris, you became a great friend, or at least when I traveled with you, I was always meeting the Queen of Greece or somebody. You became great friends with a lot of the Greek tycoons and their wives. And I'm remembering that you met Dolly and Nicholas Goulandris in that manner. And what did you remember about that?
Well, in those days, the wives of the Greeks were usually, I won't say in those days, they still are, young and chic and beautiful, many of them having been educated in England. But they were women who were bored with fishing. So Mrs. Goulandris, for instance, took up collecting while Nicholas filled the larder with fish. In this way, Mrs. Goulandris amassed gems of Cycladic art and became the godmother of many Greek children, so that the thankful Greek parents would repay her kindness with works of art. In this way, I did meet the creme de la creme of Greek society. They were always generous and interested in archaeology, myths, legends, and all the things about Greece that make them so proud, and they deserve their pride. And also in this way, nothing hindered Mrs. Goulandris from managing to amass a great art that she has left Athens, Greece, and the world. A wonderful museum under the name of the Goulandris Museum of Cycladic Art.
Iris, as we get to the close here, there were famous people of note who came to Samothrace for the mystery rites, and Mrs. Goulandris and people like her came to collect antiquities. And I just wondered, were there any more famous people that we would have ever heard of that came to Samothrace?
Well, you didn't even mention Barbra Streisand, whom I took on a tour of the Greek islands and Turkish coast. But I am thinking more of really famous people. Herodotus, the father of history, came to Samothrace and was initiated into the mystery rites. But the most subsequently influential visitors were Olympias, a princess from faraway Epirus, now part of Albania and northwestern Greece. Olympias met King Philip II of Macedon. They fell in love and were initiated into the mystery rites. Olympias had always loved the various mystery rites, and we know she was a member of the snake cult of Dionysus. Plutarch suggests that Princess Olympias may have slept with snakes, and that Philip happened on one of these erotic scenes. This exotic couple had a son who would influence the ancient world, conquering and creating one of the largest empires of the ancient world, stretching from the Adriatic Sea to the Indus Valley to the Himalayan mountains. His name? Alexander the Great. Many of you, I'm sure, remember the movie by Oliver Stone, or directed by Oliver Stone, of Alexander the Great. And Olympias was played by Angelina Jolie. Since then, I have always thought of Olympias as Angelina Jolie. She,
Especially the snake worship. Okay.
and you have no idea what other mystery rites might have been worshipped.
Iris, some time ago you mentioned that we might go someday to Samothrace.
No, wait, I haven't finished.
Oh,
Don't,
all right. I'm
don't
sorry.
jump ahead. I want to remind my friends this evening that Alexander the Great besieged Bactria, which is the ancient name for Afghanistan, for 3 years. It was the only country he was unable to conquer. But he was a peacemaker, unlike certain people we know. And he arranged a treaty with the king of Bactria, the king of Afghanistan, in which Alexander married the daughter of the king, Roxanne. And peace was made. And I'm just wondering if perhaps President Obama might marry the daughter of the Prime Minister of Afghanistan, Karzai, and resolve this problem that has been dogging us for 10 years. That's 3 times the amount of time that Alexander spent. Anyway, Alexander was born in 356 BC. On July 20th, the same day that I discovered the temple of Aphrodite.
It's nice when you can trace yourself somehow back to Alexander the Great. Well, Iris, you did say that we might go to Samothrace, which is a part of Greece that I've never been to. And you said you might take me. You just dropped this as we were having a cocktail. You said you might take me to an island that you wouldn't name, where you mysteriously believe that the head of the Winged Victory might be found. And why haven't we done this yet?
Well, frankly, Liz, I am saving it for my next discovery. I guess we will see then if the Louvre would want to undertake the expense of sending for the head, which would make the winged victory more or less complete. Liz, I can't tell you all my secrets. After all, you're a gossip columnist.
Well, now we're going to take a few questions from an audience that has just had a history lesson. And you can ask Iris anything you like, and she will tell you more than you bargained for.
Iris, I'll field the questions, but if I may, I'd like to ask you this. What part has intuition played in your discovery of your various discoveries? I mean, I know you're a scholar, but what part has intuition played?
An enormous. Tina, I don't know if you heard Tina's question.
Well, I sort of know Iris, and so I may know the answer to this, but I wondered, I'm just reading the Steve Jobs book, and they talked about how much, he talks about how much intuition meant to him. So I wondered what part intuition played in Iris, the various things that Iris discovered. I mean, I know she's a scholar, but I want to know about intuition in you.
Thank you. Actually, a great deal. I've tried to mix logic and knowledge, but intuition, one must learn to follow one's heart and one's soul and one's mind, and it will lead you to happiness.
Iris, it didn't hurt any that you knew a lot about Praxiteles' girlfriend, who he modeled the Aphrodite on, because, you were confounding the experts when you said that there might be a temple to Aphrodite at Cnidus in Turkey, and Cook and Bean said that it had been someplace else. You were right and they were wrong. That's following your intuition.
I have to tell you, Napoleon was so right. He was right when, speaking of China, he said, "Beware the sleeping yellow giant." He also said something else. He said, "Perfidious Albion." And that is...
Well, I don't know if these moderns in this audience know that Albion refers to England.
Oh, well.
I didn't know it till I met you.
Well, perfidious England. And unfortunately, although many of us, our ancestors were English, England has been perfidious, and particularly in archaeology.
Reminds me of the New America. Okay, can we have a few more questions, or shall we all get the hell out of here?
Any questions?
Where does the word Albion come from?
From the Latin word alba, which is white, and probably from the white cliffs of Dover.
No, yeah. That's
I'm just
one.
making that up.
In
No,
the
no,
back.
no, but Bessie, I seriously believe it.
Because I watched a fascinating program on Blake, BBC, yesterday, and of course he talked about Albion all the time. Blake.
William Blake.
William Blake.
Tiger, tiger, burning
Yes,
bright.
but he spoke of Albion constantly. So, it's just come up.
In the back, we've got a question.
I work with high school students, and I have an 11-year-old niece. If she wanted to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you give a young person today on trying to
I know the answer to that. Have a private have a private lot of money somewhere. I don't think archaeologists make money.
No, if you're interested in making money, archaeology is not the way to go. But if you're interested in riches of the mind and soul, by all means, go into archaeology. And I would suggest that the person take courses in history of art, and in languages, particularly, of course, Latin and Greek, but German, because when one is studying, invariably one ends up with a treatise written in German.
Why did the Germans become the forerunners of archaeology? I mean, they did so much before World War One.
This is my theory again. First of all, opposites attract. And if there's any people that are opposite, the Germans and the Italians, and the Germans and the Greeks. But I think there's even more. The Germans were the Germanic, Teutonic tribes of the north. And when Caligula, in particular, brought a private German guard to protect him, the Germans saw what civilization was like and fell in love with the civilization of Italy and eventually of Greece. And it's their yearning to be Italian or Greek. As I said, my own theory. But there has always been, as far as we know, this love of Germans for Italy and Italians and Greeks.
Well, they really did take back to Germany the Gate of Ishtar and all, so many of those things from the...
And Nefertiti.
Yes, from the Iranian.
And the Gate of Miletus. The Germans took back everything they could take. They took the entire Pergamon altar.
Well, we didn't do so bad in the Metropolitan. And
But
the British Museum didn't do so bad.
That's quite true. But the huge monuments are in Germany.
Okay. All
Then,
right.
of course, I might add, during the last World War, the Russians took the entire Pergamon altar back to Russia. And the Germans couldn't believe that their Pergamon altar, which is the size of this room, and, of course, about 20 feet tall, that their entire altar that they had done so much to bring from Turkey had disappeared. And nobody knew where it was. I mean, we thought the only people who would have carted it away would have been the Russians. And in fact, it was the Russians, and they were forced to return it to Germany, where you can see it today.
Okay, anybody else? You culture vultures. Iris, thank you so much. That was very elucidating. I couldn't believe what I learned.